And I have to tell you, I have incredible admiration for Pastor Robel being able to do this week after week. After today, I'm tapped out. I have nothing else to say. Please won't you pray with me. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in me and around me now and always. Amen. So I'd like us to take a minute today to think about probably one of the most important conversations we'll ever have. More important than conversations you'll have with your friends, your neighbors, or even your family. And I'm talking about the conversations that we have with God. I guess we sometimes refer to this as prayer, but I often think of it for myself as a monologue. I look at prayer as a monologue. I talk to God, I tell God how I feel, what I want. I tell God what I did wrong, perhaps ask for forgiveness, maybe petition or praise. Usually when I think of prayer, I'm thinking monologue. And I have a confession to make. I am a terrible prayer. I always had a problem with regular scheduled pray periods, taking time out of every day, perhaps in the morning, to pray and meditate. And I've tried. I've really tried. I'm up early every single morning when the house is dark and quiet. And I've tried to set aside a bit of time to be alone with myself and alone with God. But without fail, the cats start meowing, the motion light on the back deck clicks on, or there's some other distraction that seems more important than me connecting with myself and the divine. I had assumed that once I finished seminary and began my internship here at First Church, the act of prayer would flow out of me gently like falling rain. No. Sometimes I feel like a spiritual fraud. So my organized prayer life is pretty disorganized. And I don't mean that I feel less faithful, but certainly it isn't as deliberate as you might expect from an intern minister hoping to be ordained soon. I have the same problem that I suspect you might have, the problem of impatience, waiting for answers to my prayers. I recently saw a Frank and Ernest comic strip that really cracked me up, where one of them is having a conversation with God. Is it true, God, that 1,000 years is but a second to you? God, yes. And is it true that $1 million is but a penny to you? God, yes. Can I have a penny? Certainly. Wait a second. So the Hebrew scriptures are filled with stories crying out to God, prophets lamenting, "Where are you, God? Why have you forsaken me? Will you ever forgive me?" One of the most repeated phrases in the Bible seems to be, "How long, O Lord?" John Calvin once said, "There's such a thing as waiting patiently for the Lord with suspended desires." But it's hard to suspend desires. My difficulty is discovering that God answers prayers in more than one way. Sometimes with a yes, sometimes with a no, and sometimes with a just wait. And then there's a problem with the time that God doesn't give me the answers that I want. And sometimes when we allow our prayers to become actual conversations, the response can be difficult to handle. And we see that often in Scripture. Paul, you may remember, asked not once, but 3 times for a thorn to be removed from his flesh. But God said, no, you can handle it. And Jesus, our ultimate model of prayer, asked if it be possible to let the cup of that violent death pass him by. And we all know how that ended. His life was not spared. So how often do we pray for what we want more than what we need? What kind of life? Just imagine what kind of life it would be to live intentionally from day to day, having only our daily bread, as so much of the world's population does, though not by choice. The prayer, the Lord's Prayer, teaches us to pray not for my bread, but for our daily bread. And if we really listen, As we pray this prayer, perhaps bread would truly be shared and the world would have what it needs. Another one of my suspicions is that we probably dare not pray unless we're willing to enter into a conversation and be open to God's part of it. After all, when we pray in conversation, God is the other member. God is the other party in this conversation. And our conversations must be genuine. God will certainly be honest with us, so we at least must be honest with God. Mark Trotter writes in his book, Grace All the Way Home, throw anything up there, stumble, use bad grammar, have long embarrassing pauses, split your infinitives, and even dangle your participles. It doesn't matter. Just groan or sigh if that's all you can do, because God's hearing your prayer does not depend on your eloquence, but on God's grace, which is already at work in your life. So I'm trying to get better at this prayer thing. I'm trying not to pull any punches by telling God how I really feel and what I really feel I need. And Paul's words are comforting to me. We do not know how to pray as we ought, but God's very Spirit intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words. But God's very Spirit intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words. Have you noticed that sometimes God's response is not in words? Sometimes I picture God smiling, sometimes I see God frowning, sometimes I see him with a quizzical look thinking, what the heck are you talking about? Many years ago, when I finished graduate school, I was at a convention in New Orleans, and I had some free time, and I walked around that crazy, crazy city, and I came to St. Louis's Cathedral. And it was the time of day where the sun was just setting and evening was just coming up. It was a beautiful night, and so I walked up the steps to the cathedral, and it was completely dark inside except for some votive candles. And in the back of the sanctuary was an ancient woman dressed in black, on her knees with rosary beads. She was the only one in the church, and I could hear the beads clicking against the wooden pews. And although I could not hear her words, I could see her lips moving. And I remember having a profound sense of, I want that. I don't know what that is, but I want that. Some of my most favorite writings are from St. Teresa of Avila. And I'm not a big saint reader either. St. Teresa says that there were times when the set periods of devotion were more than enough for her, and almost more than she could stand. That during these times her mind fell out and wandered. That she felt bored, restless, and fidgety, and kept looking again and again at the hourglass. It must be nearly done, and marveled at how slowly time crawled by. Boy, can I relate to that. I must look at the clock 1,000 times when I sit with myself and try to sit with God. I'm also beginning to understand that conversation isn't always just dialogue, words in both directions. Sometimes it does include silence. Sometimes it does mean just sitting in silence with God and being open to the mysteries of life. Sometimes just opening up a space in our hearts and paying attention to the subtleties in life can be the most powerful form of prayer there is. Simple awareness of God's presence. For many years, my family and I owned a small beach cottage in Matunic, Rhode Island. And one of my favorite things to do in the morning, right when the sun was coming up, was to take a walk on the beach with our dog Monty. There was something about that walk every morning that captivated me and was very, very special. Recently, my son asked me, well, I'm an ocean person. Some people are mountain people, some people are lakes people. I'm an ocean person. And so my son said to me, what is it about the ocean that you find so special? And I really had to think about it, and I told him, when I'm walking on the beach, the sounds and the smells and the sights, those are my prayers. And when I look in the ocean and I look at the vastness and I look at the turmoil and I look at the waves, that's a way for me to understand and to know God a little bit. And it's those moments that bring God and my prayer together. So that's what I told him. That's why the beach is so important to me. And we all have those spaces in our lives where we hear and feel the presence of God. And so it seems to me spending time with God in prayer, in regular intimate conversation, and opening our hearts to the spirit of love can go a long way on our journey of compassion, and it will lead us to transformation, not just as individuals, but as a community. Because this prayer, the Lord's Prayer that we heard today in today's gospel, is the prayer of our community, not just a private one. It reminds us, challenges us, urges and inspires us as a community, not only to form this prayer with our lips, but to be formed ourselves by this prayer, formed and shaped into a community of compassionate and justice and love that makes sure that all of God's children have their daily bread, have all they need from the abundance to which we are blessed. This prayer calls us to join in the building of God's kingdom, not in heaven, but here on earth, a reign of justice, healing, mercy, and love. My parents were prayers. That was their ministry. Whenever someone needed prayers, Mike and Eleanor were called. And they sat down, took out their rosary beads, and prayed together. For them, the act of prayer repetition, of rote words, transformed those petitions, and I'm sure into the hands of God. Whatever or however your conversations with God go, whatever form they take, know that God hears. Know that the universe smiles and gently bends towards love. Ask and it will be given you. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be open for you. For everyone who asks receives, and everyone who searches finds, and everyone who knocks, the door opens. So I don't have the magic bullet or perfect recipe for how to pray. But what I do know is that opening ourselves to the possibility of connection with our world and to each other will open our hearts to knowing God's spectacular love. So ask, search, and knock.